Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that Harrison Daughtery and Zari Naini, interns in my office, be granted floor privileges until June 14, 2024.
Without objection.
Madam President, I have been sitting here listening to this, and I can't help but notice that my Democratic fellow senators have chosen to disrespect and deceive the American people as they politicize a deeply personal issue for short-term political gain, distorting facts, capitalizing on the pain and longing of women desperate to conceive, women desperate, families desperate to hold a child. Democrats are trivializing for political purposes the substantial emotional, financial, and personal investment required of a woman of a family to become pregnant through IVF. Let's set the record straight. I support IVF. Republicans in the Senate support IVF. Now, the tragic situation in Alabama has been used to fearmonger and scare that IVF is somehow in jeopardy, that someone who has a hope for a future family, that hope is threatened. And that is not true. Let's just say there is no state in the United States of America that prohibits a woman from growing her family through IVF. And Democrats know that. Let me say that again. There is not a single state which bans IVF. And Alabama, which has been mentioned several times, has specifically passed a law after the Mobile incident in which they make sure or affirm that IVF is available. So this bill before us today would have done nothing to prevent that which happened in Mobile, where embryos were dropped and destroyed. In the recent case at this Mobile Center for Reproductive Medicine, a hospital patient wandered into the embryology lab. How did that happen? Removed 5 human embryos from cryostorage and dropped them, destroying the embryos. And tragically, cases like this are not isolated. There was a storage tank failure in San Francisco that resulted in the death of 3,500 eggs and human embryos, another in Ohio in which 4,000 eggs and human embryos died. A recent investigation into a fertility clinic with 33 locations across the country uncovered multiple instances of accidental embryo destruction, mislabeled embryos, and labs of faulty heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. Just this year, a fertility clinic in California used hydrogen peroxide instead of distilled water during the incubation period, used hydrogen peroxide instead of distilled water. It killed all the embryos, or at least rendered them non-viable. And then, if you can believe it, the clinic allegedly transferred more than 24 embryos into would-be mothers, despite knowing that this would not end in a pregnancy. It is expected at a minimum fertility clinics protect and respect human life, keeping these treasured embryos safe. Women, mothers, parents, they deserve better. But what we have today is a haphazardly cut and paste, sets up a messy hierarchy of unfunded mandates and inconsistent policies. For example, under this legislation, private insurance companies are required to provide unlimited fertility treatments and related storage, but the bill limits how many treatments a veteran can get through the VA clinic. So why are women receiving care at the VA treated differently than those with commercial insurance? If access to IVF is really a problem, and this legislation is really needed, we could have addressed that if we took this bill through the committee process. But I'll note that Leader Schumer plucked it out of the committee before we had a chance to address these shortcomings and brought it to the floor for, I presume, political purposes. By the way, we don't even have a CBO score. That's usually like you can't bring anything to the floor unless you have a Congressional Budget Office score. How much is it going to cost? Because this is not serious legislation. The CBO, by the way, acknowledges that it has not and cannot evaluate this mashup of bills. Now, the committee process would have allowed us to explore the effect of a mandate on federal programs like Medicare, DOD, the VA, small businesses, state Medicaid programs. And so how will this legislation impact that woman business owner with 20 employees, 10 of whom are women in their childbearing years? We don't know. We don't know, because this is not serious legislation. It was not brought through the committee process. It is a political process. Now, we can guess premiums will skyrocket. That woman I described whose small business has 10 employees. Ask unanimous consent for 2 more minutes. Okay?
Is there objection? Without objection.
That small business owner now must make the challenging decision to either absorb the new cost or consider not offering health insurance to employees or laying employees off. Now, interestingly, Mr. President, Madam President, labor unions got more time to comply with the insurance mandate than others. If this is a political bill, you would expect a carve-out for political supporters. The bill requires coverage of genetic testing of human embryos, which may help inform decisions about which embryo to transfer first, but to what end? And will these tests be used to screen for life-ending conditions? I only see 2 limits in this bill. One on the ability of healthcare providers to exercise their conscience rights when practicing medicine, and 2, on states that wish to regulate the practice of medicine in a way that treats human embryos with the value and dignity deserved. Republicans are so open to working with Democrats on a sincere bipartisan effort, but this is a show vote. And unfortunately, Democrats do not care with working with Republicans for protecting IVF access. They wish an issue upon which to run. Today's vote is disingenuous. Pushing a bill haphazardly drafted and destined to fail does a disservice to all who may pursue IVF treatments. But I will end as I started. This seems a deceiving, disrespectful bill to misinform and scare the public, to gin up Democratic votes for November, and that is a shame. Americans deserve better. With that, I yield.